Shalom, everyone. The Sovereignty Movement is opening a series of meetings with public opinion leaders to analyze the situation and lead to the victory of Israel over its enemies. And today we are with former ambassador, Mr. Yoram Ettinger, who, as we all know, a diplomat, lecturer, consultant to Israeli and US legislators, and of course has this amazing and wonderful website, the Ettinger Report. Shalom, Yoram Ettinger.
Shalom, shalom.
We will ask you we'll lead in with a few questions and we'll let you answer. You are an expert on US-Israel relations, and our main question now is, with this war, where is the United States heading? What is the price that, if at all, or what price that Israel has to pay for America's help? And how can we make sure that Israel will safeguard its own interest? And what exactly, in your eyes, is victory? What does it mean, victory? Everybody wants Israel to be victorious. What does it mean? We'll start with that.
Okay. As far as the U.S., as expected, the U.S. wishes to advance its own interest, but one has to be aware. We're talking about U.S. interest as perceived by the State Department and the White House, which is not always similar or identical to the way the legislature, the House and the Senate, consider or assess U.S. interest, and not always in agreement with the national security agencies of the United States. At this stage, the Secretary of State, who sets the policy and is the chief architect of Biden's national security and foreign policy, the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, wants to constrain or deter Iran from getting involved in the current Israel-Hamas war. He wants to deter Hezbollah from getting deeper and deeper into this war. But at the same time, the Secretary of State wishes and acts to deter Israel from unilaterally, independently acting militarily against Iran. The Secretary of State does his utmost to prevent a preemptive Israeli attack against Hezbollah, which may be essential if we want to spare ourselves of the same debacle that we experienced in the Southern Front. And certainly the Secretary of State wants Israel to ease its pressure on Hamas in Gaza. At the same time also, the Secretary of State does not stop his or the State Department's, the White House efforts to advance the cause of Israel's eventual withdrawal from Judea, Samaria, and the establishment of a Palestinian state. What can Israel do in face of such bear hug or such pressure? Well, it requires full understanding of the American political system. There is a misguided worldview which assumes that the White House and the Secretary of State, they are exclusive voices of national security and foreign policy. The president is the commander-in-chief, and therefore he alone sets U.S. national security, foreign policy, and Israel cannot act against his wishes. The American reality is very different. According to the U.S. Constitution, the legislature, both chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate, are co-equal and co-determining, namely, they partake in the shaping of foreign policy and national security if they wish so. In most cases, they're not interested. They are involved in district affairs, they're involved in state affairs. They minimize their involvement in global issues. However, when they wish, they reveal themselves as co-equal to the president. Certainly on the issue of Israel, where majority of the House and the Senate, irrespective of the radical wing of the Democratic Party, majority supports Israel, as has been the case since 1948. And a president may not want to assist Israel as much as Israel needs, but Congress can make a difference. Just an example, 2014 was another round of Israel-Hamas wars or military operations, and President Obama delayed replenishing the Iron Dome, and he wanted to delay it until after the August recess. On the day of finishing business, he still did not approve replenishing of Iron Dome. At that stage, the Democratic chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, Barbara Mikulski, and 4 other Republicans and Democrats called the White House and told the president very, very specifically, if you do not provide your signature to the replenishing of Iron Dome, you will not get any of your wishes in the current U.S. budget. And within an hour, a telephone call came from the White House. We just signed the authorization, and Iron Dome is being replenished. Sanctions on Iran are levied by Congress. In fact, when Obama was president, he did not want Congress to levy sanctions upon the Muslim Brotherhood government of President Morsi. However, Congress wanted the sanctions, and in defiance of Obama, the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt became subject to American economic sanctions. President Trump did not want sanctions on Russia, but Congress wanted to punish Putin, and therefore sanctions were levied against Russia in defiance of Trump. And there are many, many such examples. The bottom line is that while sadly, the vast majority of Israeli policymakers, almost all of them, assume that the president is the one who exclusively determines U.S. foreign policy and national security policy. The reality is that Congress can derail presidential policy, Congress can delay presidential policy, and Congress can initiate national security and foreign policy. And it behooves Israelis to enhance, to expand their dialogue with the House and the Senate. And the basic difference when it comes to Israel between the administration, the executive, and the legislature is that the chance of changing the position of Secretary Blinken or President Biden on any of our issues is anywhere from zilch to none. On the other hand, the House and the Senate are generally open-minded, but again, for very slim radical minority among the Democrats. And when it comes to what should Israel do and how far can we go in Gaza, obviously, the number one concern for Israel is to resurrect our injured posture of deterrence. Posture of deterrence is the number one foundation of national security, especially here in the wild, unpredictable, intolerant neighborhood of the Middle East. In order to resurrect our posture of deterrence, we literally have to uproot, not just destroy, not just injure, but uproot the infrastructure of Hamas, the military infrastructure, educational, political, and religious infrastructure of Hamas. This is essential if we want to maintain the high regard towards Israel by Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco and Egypt and Jordan, and by the way, also the high regard by the USA. We can hear in Israel and abroad suggestions by friends of Israel follow the demands issued by the White House, because we need good ties with the White House. We need good ties with the USA.
And after we destroy Hamas, what's next?
What I'm saying is that defiance of American pressure enhances American respect towards Israel. Following short period of tension, short period of lost popularity, but much more important than popularity is long-term strategic respect. Once we destroy, uproot the infrastructure of Hamas, the last thing we should do is entrust the security of Israel from Gaza to non-Israelis. We should not allow the Palestinian Authority, which is not that much difference from Hamas, for anyone who understands the Palestinian education system, which has been the most productive manufacturing line of terrorists in our area. Anyone who follows the monthly allowances by Mahmoud Abbas to families of terrorists, anyone who understands, who is familiar with the PLO charter, with the Fatah charter, etc. We must not allow the Palestinian Authority to have any say in Gaza. We must not allow any inter-Arab force, because inter-Arab, by definition, is very tenuous, because the Middle East, by definition, is a tenuous area, shifty policies, shifty regimes, shifty accords, and today you may find yourself next to a very friendly Arab military force in Gaza, and overnight, because of some changing of guards in the Persian Gulf or Syria or Iraq or Jordan, suddenly that friendly military power transform itself into an imminent enemy. And by the way, we should not allow any international. We have had too many precedents of international forces in Lebanon and in Sinai, and we know how unreliable they are. And last not least, we should not allow Americans on our border. That would be a terrible injury to U.S.-Israel relations. Americans must not be on our borders. We must not rely on American soldiers to defend Israel. We need American military hardware, but we don't want, and we should not allow American soldiers on our border. We should rely on ourselves alone. And obviously, this is not going to be a picnic, but there are no free lunches, certainly not in the Middle East.
In your Hebrew talk with us, you said that when we go and explain to the Americans and to the why Israeli presence is needed in Gaza, we have, and because if not, God forbid, if the PA would take over, God forbid, it would bring to a Palestinian state. You explained in Hebrew that we have to explain that it's in the Americans' interest that the PA shouldn't be there. And we would love for you to say that also in English now.
Well, the point I would like to make is that with all due respect to commitment on behalf of Israel, which describes the pain in Israel, the threats to Israel, this should be done in Israel for Israeli consumption. But when Israelis or friends of Israel address American audiences or any Western audiences, we must tailor our arguments to the interest of our target audience. It doesn't make sense to come from Israel, talk to an American audience, trying to sell them the public relation goods from Israel because it's good for Israel. Why should they buy it if it's good for Israel? But on the other hand, if we make it clear to them that that public relation good or merchandise that we are sharing with them advances their own interest, that will resonate much clearer and also will resonate for much longer time. For instance, Judea and Samaria, a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, based on the Palestinian track record among Arabs, terrorizing Egypt, terrorizing Syria, terrorizing Jordan, terrorizing Lebanon, terrorizing Kuwait, which has been the Palestinian track record in the Arab world. That track record, in addition to the track record vis-a-vis Israel, guarantees a rogue regime in Judea and Samaria, which would eventually topple the pro-American, pro-Western Hashemite regime east of the Jordan River, which would transform Jordan into an amicable neighbor of Israel to the most dangerous element towards Israel. But more importantly, Jordan is going to be transformed into a chaotic state, into unruled state, into another platform of Islamic terrorism in the vein of Libya and Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. That would mean also heaven for the Ayatollahs. That would mean a ripple effect, a domino scenario into the Arabian Peninsula south of Jordan, which could mean the demise of the pro-US Arab oil-producing countries such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, which would bring havoc to the energy market in the world, which would bring havoc to the American economy, Western economy, let alone the proliferation of terrorism coming from the Middle East. And therefore, a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River would undermine American interest. On the other hand, Israeli control of Judea, Samaria deters terrorism. And Gaza deters terrorism and deters wars and secures such pro-American regimes as Jordan. Without our posture of deterrence, there is no future to the pursuit of peace between Israel and the Arab countries, and such peace agreements serve very well America's interest in the Middle East and beyond.
Thank you. Last but not least, you told us in the Hebrew Zoom about a fascinating story about General Wheeler and a map. If we can finish with that, it is really a very interesting story.
We're talking today about the Gaza Strip and its importance, and the fact that Gaza Strip has become a volcano of terrorism erupting, very destructive lava of terrorism. Back in June 29th, 1967, President Lyndon Johnson received a map from then Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Errol Wheeler. And that was the map of Israel's minimal requirements for its security, minimal requirements. And the map included Golan Heights, 2/3 of Judea and Samaria, and the whole of Gaza. And the general was asked, how come you have Gaza? We understand the mountains of the Golan Heights. We understand the mountain ridges of Judea and Samaria. But Gaza, it's a flat area on the Mediterranean, along the Mediterranean. Why should Israel get it? And the general, who was not a Middle Eastern scientist, but well-read person who very well prepared himself for drawing such map, told the people at the White House, I did my reading about the history of Gaza. And anyone who reads the history of Gaza knows Gaza lends itself to terrorism. If you control Gaza, you constrain terrorism. And if you do not control Gaza, you become a target for Gaza terrorism. And how right has he been? We may not, maybe we didn't know until October 7, but we know very well now, since October 7, that controlling Gaza, not allowing somebody else to control it, is a measure of security for Israel's future national security.
And is in the interest of America. One more question. When you talk about the return of the importance and the necessity of Israeli return to and control over Gaza, does that include the return of Jewish settlements, Jewish communities, as we call it in Hebrew, Hityashvut?
Well, the best way to plan our future steps is to examine and rely on track record, on past account of our actions. And the past history, or the history of modern day Israel, proves that wherever there are Jewish communities, the presence of the military is much more permanent than otherwise. Wherever we don't have Jewish communities, military presence tend to be tenuous, and not only in our own eyes, but especially in the eyes of our enemies and our detractors in the global community. Therefore, military presence is heavily assisted by civilian presence in both Judea, Samaria, Golan Heights, and Gaza as well.
Thank you very, very much, former Ambassador Yoram Ettinger.